The air in Willow House was not merely cold, it was the chilling, metallic cold of a tomb. It smelled of dust, old roses, and the cloying, unmistakable scent of finality. I stood in the drawing room where Alara had spent her last night, the morning sun, which was supposed to be bright and brazen, just like the new decade, filtering through panes so filthy they bled the light grey. The grand ballroom doors stood open, revealing a dance floor that was less polished parquetry and more forgotten ice rink. Alara Vane. My childhood friend, my confidant, the one soul who knew my reckless heart and loved me for it. And I, the glamorous detective, the toast of Melbourne's smart set, had failed her. Miserably. It had been 4 weeks since the telegram arrived, jolting me out of a decadent weekend in Monte Carlo. 4 weeks since I read the bare, brutal words. Alara Vane deceased. Verdict. Suicide. The weight of it was physical, a diamond necklace too heavy for my throat. But the true suffocating weight was the small, creased envelope sitting on the mahogany mantelpiece beside me. It bore my name, written in Alara's elegant, looping hand. It was her last letter. The one begging me to come home. The one I had shoved into a dispatch box, telling my secretary, "I'll deal with it when I return. It's probably just another drama with that dreadful husband of hers." The memory was a lash. I should have come home. I should have cancelled the champagne and the canapes. I should have known that Alara's dramas were never simple hysteria. I picked up her last appeal. My fingers, usually steady enough to handle a derringer, trembled as they traced her signature. The guilt wasn't just about ignoring her cry for help, it was about accepting the official story. Suicide. The woman I knew, vibrant, defiant, though deeply trapped, was many things, but a quiet quitter was not one of them. The official police report, a bland thing I'd already scanned, cited her fragile nerves and the strain of her failing marriage to the odious, social-climbing Henry Vane. Rubbish, I murmured to the silent house. Alara never broke. She shattered things, yes, but she never simply crumbled. I was here because I had inherited Willow House. Not the Vane fortune. Henry had secured that, but this crumbling relic, Alara's own childhood home, a last, defiant act of a woman disinheriting her tormentor. I was here for the paperwork, yes, but more truthfully, I was here for justice. Or perhaps, simply for absolution. I strolled into what had been the library, now just a cavern of shadows and mouldering leather. I had dressed simply for morning, in a bias-cut black silk dress that flowed like liquid shadow, my usual diamond accessories replaced by a single strand of black pearls. Even in grief, one must maintain standards. Henry Vane had been thorough in his emotional looting before abandoning the house. No personal mementos. No diaries. Just the vast, dusty shell. But Henry was always an amateur, convinced that money bought sophistication. He would never look where the truly valuable things were hidden. Alara and I had spent our childhood summers here, mapping secret routes, inventing games of intrigue, and establishing bolt holes that only we knew. I knelt beside the huge, cold fireplace. My gloved fingers went to the edge of the hearthrug, pulling it back to reveal the dark wood floorboards. "Let's play hide and seek, my darling," I whispered. There was a specific board, near the south corner, warped and darkened by a long-ago spill of port. We used to hide sweets there from her nanny. With a small, elegant silver tool I usually reserved for picking delicate locks, I worked the edge of the wood, slowly, carefully, until I felt the familiar give. The floorboard lifted with a faint, breathy sound, like a sigh. I peered into the dark space. It wasn't empty. I reached in and pulled out a small, flat packet, wrapped tightly in an oilskin cloth. My heart hammered, a sudden Charleston rhythm against my ribs. This was not a diary, nor was it money. It felt fragile, like paper. I carefully peeled back the oilskin, revealing a sheet of stiff, yellowed paper. It was a piece of music. The cover was simple and elegant. The Willow House Waltz, composed by A.T. But it was the back of the sheet that made the breath catch in my throat. The paper was covered not just with notes, but with faint, almost invisible script scribbled in the margins, written in the spiky hand Alara used when she was agitated. It was too dense, too disorganized to be a letter. Then I noticed the red-inked annotations. They were not music symbols, but numbers and cryptic symbols scattered beneath certain notes. Below a G-sharp, £200, third. Below a B-flat, BN knows the name. Below a C-natural, HV hand 4 AM. This was not a suicide note. It was not a confession. It was a cipher. A message hidden in plain sight, protected by the one thing Henry Vane would never notice: music. A rush of fierce, cleansing determination washed away the cold guilt. My friend had been cornered, but she had fought back. She had left a trail. My fingers traced the music sheet. The scribbled code was the key, but the true emotional center lay in the waltz itself. It was the last piece of music Alara ever intended to be played in this house. As I stared at the hidden code, the silence of the library was abruptly, violently shattered. A heavy object crashed in the hallway just outside the library door, followed by the distinctive sound of a gasping intake of breath. Not a startled sound, but one of pain. I froze, the waltz sheet clutched tight. Someone was in the house. And they were close. I wasn't supposed to be here until tomorrow. Henry Vane had been told I was still in Europe. I slipped the coded music into the inner pocket of my dress. My hand slid into my clutch bag, wrapping around the cool, familiar grip of the derringer. The silence returned, but it was now a taut, screaming absence of sound. I backed slowly away from the fireplace, my black silk dress rustling like dry leaves. I approached the library door, easing it open just a crack. The hallway was dimly lit. A magnificent full-length antique mirror that had hung on the wall for 50 years now lay shattered on the floor, glass catching the grey light like jagged ice. Standing amidst the wreckage, leaning heavily on a cane, his back to me, was a man. He wore an expensive tailored suit, but his posture was wrong, stiff, almost wooden. He had clearly stumbled and fallen against the mirror. He was tall and lean, with thick dark hair. As he slowly straightened, avoiding the broken glass with deliberate, painful movements, I saw his reflection in a small piece of glass remaining in the frame. His face was pale, his eyes focused inward, on pain. He wasn't Henry Vane. His elegance was authentic, not purchased. But there was something terribly wrong. He moved with a grace that was trapped, as if his body were fighting a memory of fluid motion. He slowly turned, and our eyes met across the broken glass. His were a startling shade of blue, deeply shadowed with sorrow and caution. "Good heavens," I said, stepping into the hall, my voice smooth and controlled, the derringer remaining hidden. A sudden flurry of interior decorating. He flinched, not at the noise, but at my presence. "My apologies," he murmured, his voice soft, almost a ghost of a sound. "I didn't realize the house was occupied. I was merely looking for the exit." "You seem to have found more than that," I replied, glancing pointedly at the ruined mirror. "I am Miss Fisher. This is my house now. And you, sir, are trespassing." His gaze didn't waver. He simply gave a slight, formal bow, wincing as he did so. "My sincerest apologies, Miss Fisher. My name is Anthony Talbot. And I believe I wrote the waltz." The man who had just nearly knocked himself senseless, who was clearly hiding a chronic injury, and who had broken the only mirror in the main hall, was the composer of the coded music I had just found hidden beneath a floorboard. My mind raced. Anthony Talbot. A.T. coincidence? Or the first, perfect piece of Alara's puzzle walking straight into my investigation? "The composer," I echoed, my lips forming a delicate, dangerous smile. "A pleasure, Mr. Talbot. I fear we have much to discuss about music. And perhaps, about my friend Alara Vane." He hesitated, his beautiful blue eyes assessing me. The wealthy woman, the detective, the threat. Then he squared his shoulders, a movement that clearly cost him. "Very well, Miss Fisher," he said, the shadow in his eyes deepening. "But perhaps we could speak somewhere that doesn't smell quite so much of death." He knew. He knew that the atmosphere of Willow House was more than dust and decay. It was soaked in tragedy. And I was certain he knew far more than just the notes on the page. This was not a simple suicide. This was a complex symphony of secrets, and Anthony Talbot was the first reluctant musician. I had come for closure. I had found a case. I had come for absolution. I found danger. Chapter 1. Anthony Talbot accepted my invitation to the city with a formality that bordered on stiffness. He refused my sporty Hispano-Suiza, preferring a quiet cab, insisting the open air irritated an old injury. I suspected he simply didn't wish to be seen in the company of a notorious flapper detective, or perhaps he just didn't want the spectacle of his compromised movements witnessed by a chauffeur. I chose the perfect setting for our conversation, a plush, secluded booth in the Serpent's Kiss, a speakeasy hidden beneath a legitimate tea room downtown. The low light, the velvet upholstery, and the smoky haze lent an air of dangerous intimacy, ideal for coercing secrets. Once settled, a potent French 75 in my hand, I leaned forward, my black pearls catching the dim glow. Mr. Talbot, you claim to have composed the Willow House Waltz. That music sheet was hidden in a secret compartment known only to Alara and myself. It was her final message. Tell me, how does a successful composer come to be trespassing in an abandoned mansion, breaking antique mirrors, and searching for the exit? He took a slow sip of his bourbon. He had the hands of an artist, long, sensitive fingers, but I noticed a faint tremor, and the way he held his glass suggested an over-reliance on the strength in his wrist. The mirror was an accident, he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed perpetually on the verge of fading. I'm not as nimble as I used to be. As for why I was there, I needed the music. Why? It's not finished. It's the only thing I have left of my work with her. Your work. You knew Alara well. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I knew her when she was still Dorothy, the dazzling girl who loved to dance. Before she married Vane and changed her name to Alara. We were collaborators. Dorothy. A sudden, sharp realization hit me. In the 1920s, many socialites used a more glamorous middle name to hide a conservative past. Alara had always been prickly about her pre-marriage life. The waltz was meant for a grand charity ball at Willow House, a secret project she was funding for my benefit. A final flourish before I retired. He paused, and a flicker of deep resentment crossed his face. I left the world of dance after an accident 5 years ago. I can no longer perform. I turned to composition. Alara supported me. And you were also her secret lover? I asked, hitting him with the blunt force of the question. He flinched, but quickly composed himself. She was married, Miss Fisher. And I was her friend, nothing more. A source of escape from Henry Vane's suffocating possessiveness. Possessiveness that turned to abuse, perhaps? Talbot's blue eyes darkened with something akin to fury. Henry Vane was a brute. A drunk. Alara hid the bruises behind long sleeves and clever conversation. When she asked for the waltz, she told me she wanted music that sounded like a beautiful lie, like her life. This confirmed part of the hidden code's hint: domestic abuse. My suspicion of foul play surged. Henry Vane had both the motive and the disposition for murder. The waltz sheet I found, I continued, pulling a small notebook from my beaded purse. It has marginalia. Numbers, symbols, and notes. Do these mean anything to you? I showed him the cryptic symbols, being careful not to let him touch the notebook. He leaned close, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the faint cold smell of the decaying house that still clung to his clothes. He studied the notes intensely. The score is mine. The script, that's Alara's. But these annotations, the red ink, they weren't there when I gave her the manuscript 6 weeks ago. She's turned the music into a grid. She's using the notes as coordinates. Coordinates for what? For information she couldn't write down. He pointed to the line, £200, third. That G-sharp is the third note in the bar. It means something important happened on the 3rd of the month. involving £200. She must have been creating a coded diary. This meant Alara did not commit suicide. She was in the active process of creating an insurance policy against her husband, hiding evidence of his abuse or corruption. She was being blackmailed, wasn't she? I asked softly. Talbot hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. She was terrified of Henry ruining her. But yes, she mentioned a debt. Not her debt, but one Henry owed that she was somehow expected to cover. She called the debt collector a shadow who danced alone. A shadow who danced alone, I repeated, intrigued. A blackmailer using dance terminology. Perhaps a former colleague of yours, Mr. Talbot? Someone from the ballet or the ballroom circuit. I've cut ties with that world. But if they're a dancer, they'd be familiar with the Willow House Waltz. I premiered it once years ago, before my injury. He rubbed his thigh, a gesture of profound discomfort. Before I could press him further, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A heavy, florid man in an ill-fitting suit was arguing loudly with the club's bouncer. It was Henry Vane. Henry spotted me instantly and shoved past the bouncer, weaving through the small tables. He looked like a storm cloud in a tailor shop. "Phryne," he bellowed, his voice laced with the stale tang of spirits. "I heard you were back. Stealing my wife's inheritance is not enough? Now you're in league with this cripple." He lunged toward our table, recognition blazing in his eyes as he saw Talbot. Talbot reacted instantly, an old, dangerous reflex overriding his pain. His left hand shot out, steadying himself on the table edge, while his right gripped his cane like a sword. The former dancer was preparing for a fight, and despite his injury, there was a shocking, latent violence in his posture. "Henry," I purred, lifting my glass and taking a slow, defiant sip of the cocktail, never taking my eyes off him. "You're interrupting a discussion on composition. I'm quite certain that is a felony offense in the more civilized corners of the world." Henry sneered, spitting out his next words. He was sniffing around Alara before she was cold, Miss Fisher. He was leeching off her charity. Then he directed his venom at Talbot. "You were warned to stay away from the house, Talbot. You'll get nothing from her now but dust." Henry Vane's presence was a definitive confirmation. He was panicking. "I think, Henry," I said, placing my glass down, "that you misunderstand the nature of this inheritance. It isn't just a house. It's the truth about what happened to Alara." Henry's face went instantly pale, the bluster draining out. He wasn't a murderer who felt remorse. He was a desperate man who saw a meticulous enemy. "Get out, Phryne," he hissed, glancing around the now silent room. "Or I'll have you run out of town for slandering a mourning widower." "Mourning?" I rose, my slender figure challenging his bulk. "You seem less bereaved, Henry, and more like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. You had motive, you had opportunity, and now I have your wife's confession hidden in a piece of music." That last statement was a calculated bluff, a fishing lure cast directly into his fear. It worked. Henry Vane recoiled, his eyes wide. "You won't get away with this, Phryne. You won't," he yelled, before stumbling backward and crashing out of the booth, knocking over a waiter in his panicked retreat. I turned back to Talbot, who was watching me with a mixture of awe and fear. "He's terrified," I stated, retrieving my notebook. "Not just of exposure, but of that coded music. Tell me, Mr. Talbot, what do you know about BN Knows the Name? And what kind of scandal could ruin the mighty Henry Vane?" Talbot took a deep, rattling breath, his guard finally falling away. "Miss Fisher, Alara confessed to me. Vane didn't just owe money. He's been involved in a massive embezzlement scheme linked to the municipal bond market. He took the money from an Australian war veterans fund. The name, BN. He's the middleman. A man of quiet reputation. The kind of man who would never be suspected. A prominent socialite murdering his wife to cover up a war veteran's charity fraud. It was utterly repugnant. I pulled out my compact, touched up my lipstick, and prepared for the hunt. "Thank you, Mr. Talbot," I said, rising. It seems my dear friend has left me a case that is far from finished. I need to find BN, and I need to find evidence of that embezzlement. You and your broken body are coming with me. You know the players, and you understand the music. He stared at the cane in his hand. Where are we going? I smiled, a sharp, exhilarating edge to my expression. To the man who handles all of Henry Vane's discreet paperwork and investments. The quiet man. The one whose silence shouts the loudest. We are going to see a solicitor named Mr. Bartholomew North. Chapter 2. Bartholomew North's office was not in the flamboyant new financial district, but tucked away on a discreet, oak-paneled side street known for quiet prestige. It was precisely the setting for a man who profited from maintaining a spotless public reputation while dealing in the dirtiest secrets. When we arrived, North's secretary, a pinched woman with severe spectacles, informed us Mr. North was unavailable. I promptly dismissed the secretary, using the sheer force of my personality and the implicit threat of calling the police regarding a major financial scandal, and strode directly into the inner office. Bartholomew North was exactly as Anthony Talbot had described, a man defined by a lack of definition. He was impeccably dressed in a sober grey suit, his hair neatly parted, his features pleasant but forgettable. He was meticulously arranging a set of leather-bound documents, radiating the calm assurance of someone who believed himself utterly untouchable. "Miss Fisher," he said, not rising, though a flicker of annoyance betrayed his carefully cultivated composure. "This intrusion is highly irregular." "Irregularity is often the spice of life, Mr. North," I replied, taking a seat directly opposite him and crossing my legs, letting the sleek line of my silk dress become a distraction. Talbot stood stiffly by the door, his cane resting against the wall, acting as my silent, injured sentinel. "We're here about a matter of old money and even older sins. I assure you, my practice is above reproach. Reproach is often in the eye of the victim, Mr. North. Or in the eye of the detective hunting for the truth about a suicide that wasn't a suicide." I placed a copy of Alara's coded Waltz sheet, a facsimile, naturally, on his pristine desk, pointing to the line, "BN knows the name." North's hands, resting flat on the mahogany, remained steady, but a faint flush crept up his neck. This was a man whose body registered stress before his face did. "This is utter nonsense, Miss Fisher. Vane has been erratic since his wife's tragic death. If he is attempting to blackmail you with forged documents, I advise you—" "Henry Vane is the least of my concerns," I interrupted, leaning closer, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I believe you were blackmailing Alara Vane, using knowledge of Henry's War Veterans Fund embezzlement as your leverage. Alara was covering for him, paying you off to protect the Vane name and, I suspect, her own life." Talbot shifted by the door, the cane clinking softly against the floor, a simple tense sound that cut through North's controlled silence. North finally picked up the music sheet, examining the coded script. "If this refers to me, which I highly doubt, then what name do I know? You claim I have the leverage. What exactly was Henry Vane hiding beyond mere theft?" I fixed him with my sharpest gaze. Alara's final letter to me, the one I regretfully ignored, was not just a plea for help against Henry's violence. It was a plea to stop the destruction of his final victim. Henry Vane murdered someone, didn't he, Mr. North? Someone long ago, whose death was covered up with money and influence. North let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "That is a monstrous accusation, Miss Fisher. Suicide, embezzlement, and now murder? You're weaving quite a colorful tapestry." "I specialize in tapestries," I countered coolly. "Especially those woven from hidden desires and corruption. The £200, third entry suggests a monthly payment you receive to keep your silence about the embezzlement. But the blackmail didn't start there, did it? It started with the HV Hand 4 a.m. entry. That's the true secret. The moment Henry's hand dealt death, North finally broke. Not with a shout, but with a chilling, surgical calm. "Henry didn't kill her, Miss Fisher," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine, cold and lifeless. He didn't need to. He simply tortured her until she broke. But you are correct about the rest. Henry Vane murdered his first wife. Talbot gasped, the sound raw and uncontrolled, echoing in the quiet office. North continued, relishing the unexpected revelation. Years ago, before Elara, Henry's first wife, Beatrice, drowned in their private pond late one night. The coroner called it a tragic accident. Too much wine, a slippery edge. I handled the paperwork. Henry paid me a staggering retainer to ensure the accident was tidy. He needed her death to be seen as clean for the inheritance. And you used this knowledge to bleed him dry, I concluded. You weren't just the solicitor, you were the jailer. I was preserving my own security, North corrected smoothly. But Elara found a ledger Beatrice had kept, detailing his constant threats and abuse. Elara was going to expose him using that ledger. That's why she was paying me, to keep my silence about Beatrice's death, buying time to figure out how to escape him without being ruined. The tension in the room was excruciating. We had the motive for Elara's death, stopping her exposure of a previous murder, and the name of the victim, Beatrice. Where is this ledger now? I demanded. North smiled, a thin, triumphant expression. If I knew that, I wouldn't need to be so discreet with my finances, would I? Elara was too clever to tell me. She only revealed it to me a week before her death, saying she had put it where the music is. I suspect Henry is looking for it still. And what of Elara's death? I pressed. You claim Henry didn't kill her. Did she, despite her defiance, finally take her own life? North rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. She died, Miss Fisher, because her body couldn't take the pressure of living a lie and concealing a murder. I believe she collapsed. Henry found her, saw his chance, and staged the suicide to cover up the fact that she was about to expose him for Beatrice's murder. This theory was plausible, fitting the official narrative but pinning the responsibility squarely on Vane. As North turned back, his calm broke. He pointed a shaking finger at Talbot. Get that man out of my office, Miss Fisher. I recognize him now. Anthony Talbot. The disgraced dancer. He was quite close to Beatrice Vane, too, wasn't he? He was her dance partner, before her unfortunate accident. He was sniffing around this house 20 years ago. You think I'm the one who knows all the secrets? Ask him about Beatrice's last waltz. Ask him why he's so crippled now. The solicitor's accusation was swift, venomous, and completely unexpected. I whirled to face Talbot. He was leaning on his cane, his face utterly devoid of color, the blue eyes wide with pure shock. He looked like a man who had just had the floor ripped out from under him. Is that true, Anthony? I asked, the thrilling pursuit replaced by a cold fear of betrayal. Beatrice Vane? The first wife. Talbot swallowed hard, his voice a ragged whisper. It was an eternity ago. He's right. I danced with Beatrice. But I swear, I had nothing to do with her death or Elara's. It's the truth, Phryne. North called out, clearly sensing my doubt. Ask him about the night of her death. He was there. She was paying him off too, once. And when he left the world of dance, where did he go? Right back to the Vane women, hiding behind composition. The weight of suspicion, once focused on North and Henry Vane, now swung violently towards the one man I had started to trust. The crippled dancer, the sensitive collaborator, was connected not just to Elara's death, but to the original, covered-up murder. Anthony, I said, crossing the room to stand before him. We need to leave. Now. He nodded mutely, his focus purely on steadying his breathing. As we walked out, North's smug, triumphant voice followed us down the hall. The problem with solving old murders, Miss Fisher, is that sometimes, the killer is the one you chose as your partner. Chapter 3. The accusations rattled me, not because I believed Anthony Talbot was a killer, but because he was a liar. My success as a detective rests entirely on my ability to read people, and while Talbot's grief seemed genuine, His silence regarding Beatrice Vane suggested a profound, compromised guilt. I guided Anthony away from the Solicitors' Street, hailing a cab toward my own residence, where we could speak without the pressure of North's calculating gaze. The city air felt cold, but the tension radiating from the man beside me was glacial. "We need to stop," I told the driver. "Take us to the old Astoria building on Flinders Lane. The 4th floor." The Astoria housed my private practice room, a beautifully mirrored, soundproofed haven I used for practicing the tango and for conducting sensitive interrogations. I needed to see Talbot move. I needed to see him reflected, literally and figuratively. Once inside the dimly lit mirrored room, I took off my hat and faced him. North's accusation was intended to distract me. But it served a better purpose. It proved you haven't told me everything. You were Beatrice's partner. What precisely was your connection to the first Mrs. Vane? Anthony leaned heavily on his cane, his eyes flitting nervously toward the mirrors that lined the walls. "Beatrice was my muse," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "She was the first to recognize my talent. We were professional partners for 5 years, the best in Melbourne. We were going to go to Europe. Then she met Henry Vane. He was obsessed with her glamour, her social standing. He offered her marriage, security, and an escape from the brutal life of a professional dancer. She took it. And you were left behind. I was left heartbroken. But I stayed her friend. And when the marriage turned sour, when Henry started drinking and hitting her, I was the only one she trusted. She told me everything. She confided in me that she was leaving him and that she was taking a ledger full of evidence. The same ledger Ilara later found. The ledger proving Henry murdered her? "No," he said, a look of anguish crossing his face. The ledger proving Henry was going bankrupt through embezzlement and that he was violently abusing her. The night she died, she had arranged to meet me at a hidden boathouse on the estate to hand over the ledger. She wanted me to take it to the authorities so Henry couldn't hurt her again. "And did you meet her?" He shook his head, a gesture of deep, agonizing regret. "I was late. So late. I was coming across the paddock when I saw Henry and his chauffeur leaving the boathouse quickly. I ran down. Beatrice was gone. I found the ledger tucked beneath a stone on the pier, but Beatrice. I thought she had been taken by Henry. Then the papers reported her tragic, accidental drowning." "So you had the evidence of Henry's crimes," I summarized. "Why didn't you go to the police?" His voice dropped to a pained whisper. "Because the police would have asked where I was earlier that evening. I was driving too fast, racing to meet Beatrice. I was involved in a terrible car accident. A collision. I shattered my left knee. The doctor said I'd never dance again." He looked down at his cane. "I couldn't go to the police with the ledger because I was compromised. If Henry had found out I was trying to expose him, he would have dragged me into the inquiry for the car crash, perhaps even blamed me for being near Beatrice's body. So I took the ledger, I locked it away, and I let Beatrice's death be ruled an accident. I couldn't bear the ruin of her reputation. Or mine. And that is why you move like a broken man," I stated, understanding the full measure of his torment. His physical injury mirrored his profound moral guilt. "Yes. I failed her. And I paid for that failure." But then he smiled, a genuine, fleeting warmth that was instantly unsettling. "I paid for it, but I didn't waste the evidence. The ledger is hidden, Phryne. Not even Henry Vane could find it." "Where?" "Where the music is hidden. But not in the drawing room." He looked at the mirrors again, his reflection showing a tall, once commanding figure now bent with regret. "The real secret compartment. The second layer. Ilara discovered my secret the year after her marriage to Vane and made it her own. She used the music sheet as the first key to lead me back to the evidence." Suddenly, the line, HV hand 4 a.m., on the Waltz sheet made horrifying sense. It didn't mean Henry Vane's hand dealt death. It meant Henry Vane's chauffeur's hand was involved in moving the body at 4 a.m., confirming Anthony's account of seeing them leave the boathouse. The HV stood for the vehicle or the house, and the hand for the accomplice. I pulled out the coded music sheet. The waltz is the key. Where does it lead? Anthony pointed to the final bar of the music, the one that faded into silence. The sheet music is the Willow House Waltz. It's a piece about love that dies. But a waltz is danced in 3/4 time. Ilara always loved the triple meter. She taught me a trick. To find the truth, you must always look at the third reflection. He pointed to the mirrored wall. You have 3 mirrors in this room. In a waltz, the pattern is usually a box step, leading you to pivot. If you stand in the center and follow the pattern of the triple meter, the 1-2-3, 1-2-3 beat, you will inevitably find yourself looking at the third reflection of yourself. And what does the third reflection show? It shows the truth that is hidden behind the obvious deception. I looked at the waltz sheet again, my mind translating music theory into physical architecture. The library's famous, tall, glass-fronted bookcases. The floorboards. The rhythm of concealment. The third window in the library, I realized aloud. The one facing the old stables. That's where you always kept your sheet music, isn't it, Anthony? Behind the third pane of glass. Anthony gave me a look of immense relief, his blue eyes finally showing a flicker of their old spark. Ilara moved it from behind the third window. She hid it behind the third bookcase in the library. In the third reflection. We had the location. Now, we had to move before Henry Vane realized I had brought in his first wife's accomplice. We need to get back to Willow House, Anthony. Now. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding with the imminent prospect of finding the definitive evidence that would send Henry Vane to the gallows for 2 murders. Suddenly, the door to the practice room flew inward with a sickening crash. Silhouetted in the doorway, blocking the exit and breathing heavily, was Henry Vane. He must have followed us from North's office, perhaps recognizing the destination of my exclusive cab company. He was no longer drunk. He was lethal. He held a heavy-duty wrench, and his eyes were wild with desperation. "The ledger," Henry snarled, taking a staggering step into the room, his eyes instantly fixing on Anthony and the wall of mirrors. "I knew you couldn't stay away from the truth, Talbot. You ruined my first marriage, and now you've ruined my second. Where is the ledger, Phryne? And where did Ilara tell you to look?" He lunged toward me, the wrench raised high. I reacted instantly, diving away from the blow. The wrench struck the mirrored wall where I had been standing just moments before. The glass shattered with a deafening cacophony, raining down jagged, glittering shards onto the practice room floor. Chapter 4. The shattered glass covered the floor like dangerous, glittering confetti. Henry Vane stood amidst the wreckage, his massive frame shaking with rage, the heavy wrench dripping condensation onto the mirrored fragments. "The ledger," he roared, advancing on me. "You've been talking to that snake North. Where did she hide it, Phryne? The war fund is under audit. If they find proof of Beatrice's death, I'm finished." I scrambled backward, narrowly avoiding a shard of mirror that threatened to slice my silk stocking. My derringer was still in my purse, which was flung near the doorway. I had to create a distraction. "You're already finished, Henry," I spat, keeping my voice deceptively calm. "You murdered Beatrice and you drove Ilara to her death. The only thing left for you to decide is whether you'll face the gallows for 1 murder or 2. The comment infuriated him, causing him to charge, careless of his footing. Suddenly, Anthony Talbot moved. It was not the panicked flinch of a cripple, but the calculated move of a former maestro. He hurled his heavy, silver-tipped cane like a javelin. It struck Vane directly in the chest. Vane grunted in pain and stumbled, the wrench clattering against a ballet bar. The sudden, swift action gave me the precious seconds I needed. I lunged for my purse, snatched the derringer, and pointed it directly at Vane's heart. "Stop, Henry," I commanded, the cold authority in my voice cutting through his panic. "I am a skilled shot. I suggest you hold still." He froze, his breath ragged. His eyes, however, fixed not on the gun, but on Anthony, who was now leaning against the wall, his face pale with exertion, his injured leg trembling uncontrollably. "You damned cripple," Vane sneered. "Always trying to be the hero. You couldn't save Beatrice, and you couldn't save Alara. You just leave a trail of death and broken mirrors everywhere you go." "At least I leave a trail," Anthony gasped, leaning hard against the wall. "Unlike you, Henry, who thinks he can simply erase his victims." Alara wasn't a victim. She was a weak fool who finally took the easy way out, and I helped her look good doing it. I pressed the barrel of the derringer forward, hardening my resolve. "That's a confession, Henry. You found her, and you staged the suicide to frame her failure." Vane wiped sweat from his brow. "She was alive when I found her. She was having a seizure, rambling about the ledger and the third reflection. She had a vial of laudanum in her hand. I didn't kill her. I just held her down and made sure she finished the job, so no one would find Beatrice's ledger." He finally admitted it. He was directly responsible for Alara's demise, leveraging her distress to ensure her silence and his freedom. "It doesn't matter, Henry," I said, my voice cold. "A forced suicide is still murder. Now, where is the chauffeur who helped you move Beatrice's body?" Before Vane could answer, the door swung open again. It was the building's janitor, drawn by the sound of the shattering glass. "What in God's name is going on here?" the janitor exclaimed, his eyes wide. Vane saw his chance. With a desperate shove against the ballet bar, he knocked over a stand of potted ferns, creating another screen. Then, with a speed that belied his bulk, he charged through the open door and disappeared down the fire escape. I cursed under my breath. "I need my car. Anthony, can you manage the stairs?" "I'll manage," he muttered, grabbing his cane from the floor. He hobbled to the window, peering down at the alleyway. "He's running toward the docks. He'll try to catch the overnight freight train." "He's running to the docks, but first, he'll run to Willow House," I corrected, grabbing my coat. "He knows we have the key to the code, and he knows we're one step away from the ledger. He'll destroy the evidence before he flees the country. We have to beat him there." We raced out, leaving the bewildered janitor to call the police regarding the domestic disturbance. Within minutes, I was behind the wheel of the Hispano-Suiza, driving with the reckless abandon the stylish machine was built for. Anthony was in the passenger seat, his instructions sharp and precise, compensating for his crippled leg with a razor-sharp intellect. "The third bookcase, Phryne," Anthony urged as we sped toward the mansion. "It's a false front." Alara hollowed out the back. "If Vane gets there first, the whole house goes up in smoke," I said grimly. We arrived at Willow House just as the last of the winter light was bleeding out of the sky. The house looked like a dark, silent battleship anchored in the snow. We found the front door ajar. Inside, the sound of splintering wood and muffled rage echoed from the library. Henry Vane had beaten us to the punch and was desperately tearing the room apart. We crept into the hallway. "Anthony, the police are on their way," I whispered, drawing the derringer again. "But we have to stop him from destroying the evidence." We moved into the library. Vane was beside the third bookcase, the false front now ripped halfway off. He was hacking frantically at the contents, a thin, black ledger, with a fireplace poker. The pages were tearing, the ink bleeding. "Henry Vane," I shouted. "Stop now, or I swear I will put a hole in your expensive waistcoat." He whirled around, the poker raised. His eyes locked on me, then shifted to Anthony, standing weakly by the doorway. "You!" Vane screamed at the dancer. "You always ruined everything. You took Beatrice, and then you took Alara's loyalty. Now, watch me burn your precious memories." With a final, desperate burst of strength, Vane slammed the poker down onto the ledger. But before he could strike again, Anthony lunged forward, not toward Vane, but toward the grand piano in the corner. He slammed his elbow onto the keys in a discordant, shuddering C-sharp major chord. The sudden violent burst of sound was meant to startle, and it succeeded. Vane flinched, momentarily blinded by the noise. The moment his attention shifted, I fired the derringer. The small caliber bullet struck him not in the heart, but in the shoulder, a stunning, debilitating blow. Vane dropped the poker, clutching his arm, roaring in pain. The ledger, though damaged, was still intact. I rushed forward and snatched the black book. The final pages, though ripped, clearly detailed Henry Vane's embezzlement scheme and, most critically, Beatrice's account of the night of her murder. I had the evidence. Vane was captured, bleeding, and defeated. Anthony, however, was in far worse shape. The violent, sudden movements had taken a brutal toll. He collapsed onto the cold, dusty floor, his face white, gripping his crippled leg in silent agony. I knelt beside him, tucking the ledger into my coat. "It's over, Anthony. We have him." He nodded, unable to speak, focusing only on managing the searing pain. Just then, the wail of police sirens echoed from the lane outside. I looked down at the ruined, beautiful dancer lying on the floor. I knew the physical damage was profound, but the moral weight of his long-held secret was finally lifted. The case was closed, but the emotional debt remained. Chapter 5. Henry Vane was bundled away by the arriving constables, screaming threats and denials that sounded hollow even against the echoing sirens. The ledger, now evidence, was safely secured in my possession. I stayed at Willow House until dawn, tending to Anthony Talbot, whose old knee injury had flared viciously from the shock and the sudden physical exertion. After securing his leg in a brace and ensuring he was comfortable in one of the parlor chairs, far away from the shattered mirror, I finally allowed myself to relax. The silence that settled over Willow House was different now. It was no longer the oppressive silence of concealed tragedy, but the quiet exhaustion following a long-fought battle. Later that morning, as the first rays of sun pierced the windows, I found Anthony watching the dust motes dance in the light. He looked utterly drained, but the deep lines of guilt around his eyes had softened. "You saved the ledger, Phryne," he murmured, his voice stronger now. "And you saved me from carrying that weight any longer." "We saved each other," I corrected, sitting opposite him. "You provided the vital context, the third reflection that revealed the true nature of Henry Vane. He wasn't just a brute who drove his wives to distress. He was a calculated murderer who profited from their deaths." I opened a small valise I'd brought. "I found something else, Anthony. Something in the hollowed-out back of the bookcase, beside Beatrice's ledger." I pulled out a small, exquisite silver locket on a delicate chain. "It's Alara's," he whispered, reaching out a hesitant hand. Inside the locket were two photographs. One, a formal portrait of a young Alara, radiant before her marriage. The other, a candid, slightly blurred snapshot of Anthony and Alara laughing together, their faces close, on the dance floor. "She kept you close, Anthony," I said gently. "She didn't leave a coded message because she feared being exposed. She left it because she needed the one person who understood the music of her life, you, to finish her fight." Tears welled in his blue eyes, an honest grief that finally validated his long years of pain. "She saw me as whole, Phryne, even when I couldn't see myself." I spent the next 2 days coordinating with the police and my own legal team, ensuring that Vane's capture, the evidence of Beatrice's murder, proving Henry's premeditation, and the financial crimes were all meticulously documented. The story hit the front page, eclipsing every other scandal in the city. The elegant, feared Henry Vane, exposed as a double murderer and a thief of war veteran funds. 3 weeks later, I decided that Willow House had suffered enough. I organized a small, private memorial. No police, no press, just a few friends who had loved Alara, or Dorothy, as I now thought of her. And Anthony. The ballroom had been thoroughly cleaned. The floor was polished, the dust banished, and the heavy velvet curtains drawn back to let in the winter sunshine. A small, 5-piece orchestra was tuning up. I walked over to Anthony, who was standing stiffly by the entrance, dressed immaculately in evening wear, still leaning lightly on his cane. "A memorial waltz, Phryne?" he asked, a shadow of reservation in his voice. "I can't dance. Not anymore." "Nonsense," I smiled, taking his arm. Elara's last message wasn't a warning, Anthony. It was a promise of release. We're here to offer her peace, and that starts with the music she loved, played in the space where she truly lived. The orchestra began to play. It was soft, melancholic, yet full of enduring beauty, the Willow House Waltz. I led Anthony out onto the center of the dance floor. We don't need the grand flourishes, I murmured, placing my hand lightly on his shoulder. We just need the essence. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I started the basic box step, leading with gentle confidence, accommodating the stiffness in his left leg. He moved cautiously at first, relying on his formidable upper body strength and the memory etched into his spine. Then, something shifted. As the familiar notes of his own composition washed over him, the physical pain seemed to recede. His frame straightened. His hand tightened on mine, no longer trembling. The movement was no longer forced or awkward, but deliberate, controlled, and deeply expressive. He was dancing the truth he had carried for 20 years. A waltz for Beatrice, the girl he couldn't save. A waltz for Elara, the friend who had set him free. As the music swelled, he looked at me, his eyes full of gratitude, respect, and a nascent, thrilling new desire. "You are the most dangerous woman I have ever met, Miss Fisher," he whispered, a genuine smile finally breaking through his sorrow. "And you, Mr. Talbot, are the most beautiful composer of broken things," I countered, leaning into the simple rhythm. We finished the waltz alone on the floor, the music fading into a final lingering note of quiet resolution. Anthony bowed, a movement that was once again purely graceful, not pained. He did not apologize for his limp or for his cane. He did not run away. The weight of the past was lifted. The villain was caged. The heroine had found justice, absolution, and perhaps a complicated new partner for the next chapter of the dance. "Where do we go from here, Phryne?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I smiled, pulling my coat collar up and reaching for my car keys. "We have a case to solve in Shanghai, Anthony. They say the music there is utterly irresistible." He laughed, a rare, rich sound. "Then I suppose I'll need a new cane. And perhaps a new waltz." "Perhaps," I agreed. "But first, let's see about a cocktail." And so the curtains close on Willow House, leaving behind not the ghost of a suicide, but the triumphant echo of justice long delayed. Miss Phryne Fisher uncovered the dark truth hidden beneath a beautiful melody, proving that even the most meticulously staged crime can't withstand the glare of a sharp mind and a fearless heart. But the 1920s are full of secrets. Henry Vane is caged, but countless other scoundrels lurk beneath the surface of glamour, wealth, and quiet respectability. Did you correctly guess that the humble solicitor, Bartholomew North, was the key to the cover-up? Don't let the mystery end here. If you were captivated by the style, the scandal, and the sheer audacity of this case, join us for more tales where hidden desires meet deadly consequences. Subscribe to Mysteries and Roses and ring that notification bell. We delve into a new, unforgettable historical mystery every week, from the gilded cages of Parisian high society to the smoky backrooms of Prohibition-era Chicago. Let us be your guide to the secrets history tried to bury.